Hello everybody. We are continuing with Techniques of Integration webinar commentaries. We're on number 15. We have completed the stanza for the sixth ray and are now into Master DK's discussion of that stanza. So it will be apparent, therefore, that the sixth ray disciple has first of all to achieve the arduous task of dissociating himself from his vision, from his adored truth, from his loved ideals, from his painted picture of himself, the ahamkara again, himself, eyes upon the self, right? Eyes upon the lower self, as the devoted follower, the disciple, following his master unto death, and therefore, you know, in one way, achieving some personal distinction or recognition for so doing. I think it is very very clear that this type of disciple or aspirant, let us say, craves recognition of some kind. And the glamour of special selection is one of those important glamours for the sixth ray type. And following his master unto death, if need be. Forcing himself from very love of form, and that's the first thing. At first, it is not the high spiritual ideal connected with some spiritual idea. But rather the idealization of form, and forcing all his fellow men to dedicate himself to that which he sees. Now, I've discussed the reason why that might be occurring, and it has to do with the alleviation of the anxiety felt in the face of a contrasting situation. It renders the sixth ray type insecure. In other words, if another point of view is held, his might be, after all, incorrect, so he seeks that to enforce uniformity, almost a totalitarian uniformity upon others. When the sixth ray is involved, the totalitarian solution may not be far behind. Now, I want to point out this word dissociation because it is a good one, and it is the word chosen by Zachary Lansdowne, who's written a number of excellent books on esoteric psychology and esoteric healing, and he and I have discussed this, and I think the Tibetan has mentioned this word dissociation. What is the difference between dissociation and detachment? Well, in a way, detaching from form, one still keeps one's eyes upon the form. When one dissociates, one breaks the connection with a particular vision and no longer entertains it. When one is detached, one may still view that from which one is detached, but not have the same feeling about it. So there is the need for a separation, need for a separation from that which was so assiduously followed. I think if we look at various types of ideals and visions, we will see perhaps how material many of them really are, and how they tend to adhere to the formal aspect rather than to a true abstraction. I mean, to be devoted to the good is an abstraction, to the true, to the beautiful, those are all abstractions. But to be devoted to forms or symbols which represent those, that is an example of what DK calls acting or forcing oneself from the very love of form to adhere to a particular representation of an abstraction. So at first I would say, we have adherence to a form which represents an abstraction, and only later to the abstraction itself. And I think, you know, there are many relatively low consciousnesses which pursue the form of which represents the abstraction. So maybe we will, in fact, discover that the word dissociation is the word of power. I have also suggested restraint, but I want to see, really, after a number of years have passed between my suggestion of the word restraint and my learning of Zachary's word dissociation, which is the better word, or whether both carry some indication. So, will dissociation be the word of power, or the sixth ray, or does restraint tell us something? Well, it certainly restraint will be useful in the advice by the soul to run not so straight. Hold yourself back and don't rush to the outer rim. And I suppose that one would restrain oneself if one no longer were attached or associated with a particular vision. They are both part of each other. Perhaps restraint follows upon dissociation, we might say. And we will see what the Tibetan says. Unfortunately, he said he was going to give us all these words, and maybe this is a test for us. Maybe, in fact, he did give us the words, but he did not single them out and talk about them. And after having set the example in 5 cases, he left it to us to find the way. All right, let's move a little further here. It must be recognized that he, this sixth ray aspirant, lacks the wide love of the second ray disciple. It's a very focalized, channeled, canalized type of magnetic attraction. And it's not so much the drawing into oneself. Maybe I can find that definition. Not so much the drawing into oneself, which true love is. And it is this definition to which I wanted to call our attention, and we will see why it does not fit so well with the sixth ray approach. Love is an aspect of the will which is a point very little realized by the mass of men. It is the will, and or if we preferred to say the act of drawing, the will to draw into oneself, into itself, or the will to attract into itself. And this will, when exerted towards that which is not material, we, in reaction to the differentiating mind, call love. The act of drawing into oneself, the act of attracting to oneself, the will to draw into oneself, the will to attract to oneself. And when this is not reaching into the worlds of form, as we are told in the second ray integration formula, we call it by the name love. There are some, I think, excellent, definitions of the term love. Let's see, L-O-V-E. Love, an excellent definition. Let's see. Love was the impelling motive for manifestation, and love it is that keeps all in ordered sequence. Love bears all on the path of return to the Father's bosom, and love eventually perfects all that is. It is love that builds the forms that cradle temporarily the inner hidden life, and love is the cause of the disruption of those forms and their utter shattering, so that the life may progress further. It's as if the second aspect of the will is involved in the destruction of the causal body. Love manifests on each plane as the urge that drives the evolving monad onwards to its goal, and love is the key to the Deva kingdom and the reason of the blending of the two kingdoms eventually into the divine hermaphrodite, especially on the Buddhic and finally the monadic plane. That's a beautiful description. And here we have love and wisdom defined. Love as relationship to divinity, and wisdom as relationship to form lie behind the soul's intent. So in this respect, love is even a higher energy, is it not? It does not indicate the inflow of Shambhala energy through the medium of the soul, whose intrinsic nature is spontaneous love. I suppose that is the nature of the soul. This is the ability to love that which is objective or the not-self, and ultimately to use wisdom, to use with wisdom the form. So wisdom is definitely related to the form, as interestingly is the first ray. Those on the first aspect of the second ray are said to be on the wisdom aspect. What is the true way to love is to reflect and meditate deeply and constantly upon the significance and meaning of love, its origin, its expression through the soul, its qualities, its goals, its objectives. I think we're getting the idea here. Love is that, here we go, this is a beautiful one. Love is that inclusive, non-critical, magnetic comprehension and attitude which, in group work, preserves the group integrity, fosters the group rhythm, and permits no secondary personality happenings or attitudes to mar the group work. That's a good definition that we can put there, and to remind us that it is the wide love, inclusive, non-critical, magnetic comprehension. It has understanding to it, and it is, the heart is a group-centered organ. The heart is what's involved in group work, and not the solar plexus so much, at least in the most desirable condition. So there is a self-centeredness in the sixth ray type, which it is harder to outgrow than in the second ray type. So this aspirant is all the time occupied with himself and his work and his sacrifice and his task, his ideas and his activities. In other words, how do these things seem to me is the question. And there is no standing back from one's emotional emotional, personal point of view. He, the devotee, is lost in his devotion. Of course, the main thing is he fears being lost and excommunicated from his desired goal, which is the goal of everlasting happiness found in one object of devotion. When in the state of devotion, he feels he is connected with the source, which is home, and makes him feel ever found, ever safe, ever included. He, the idealist, is driven by his idea, or shall we call it ideal. If he does fully understand the idea, we can ask, does he fully understand the idea? Or is he emotionally attracted to the idea, hence following an ideal? He, the follower, runs with full and blind faith, blindly after his master. His master can do the seeing for him, correct? His master can do the seeing for him. Well, I think, so many of us who are on the second ray have spent a lot of time, maybe millions of years, on the sixth ray. Maybe some of us on the fourth ray, maybe some on both. It might be possible to move from, who knows, 6 to 4 to 2. I wondered whether the Christ individualized in Lemuria was individualized as a fourth ray soul or as a sixth ray soul. I wondered whether in Lemuria he was not a sixth ray soul and in Atlantis a fourth ray soul taking the third initiation with the Buddha on the fourth ray, and maybe in Aryan times a second ray soul, which we know him to be and to have been and to be. He, the follower, runs blindly after his master, after his chosen ideal, and loses himself again in the chaos of his uncontrolled aspirations. And this is a bit like the idea of the frenzy found in connection with both the sixth ray and the third ray. Okay. TH. I'm not doing so well, am I? TDRY. Well, third ray, in any case. Right. When we look at modern humanity, we will see quite a number of the problems as sixth-ray problems. There are many leftovers of Atlantean tendencies in the consciousness of man. And we are not yet really, as an entire race, mentally focused. Well, neither is the solar logos mentally polarized, and the planetary logos is even farther away from mental polarization. Humanity as a whole is not even mentally focused, yet alone mentally polarized. There is a difference between the two, and polarization is a higher state than merely mental focus. So he loses himself in the chaos of his uncontrolled aspirations, as if the more he aspires blindly, the closer he is to home. As if the more he aspires and blindly, the closer he is to home. And home is the place of refuge and safety and inclusion and loss of all anxiety of separation. And I do think the sixth ray type really suffers the separation anxiety more than most. I think on the second ray we're already outgrowing that a little bit, because we realize in a way we can never be separated from divinity. In the law of repulse there is a kind of a transition in the sixth ray stanza from the sixth ray to the second ray, and I think you'll see that here if I'll just point out where that transition occurs. And it's here when finally he leads the other follower to the light and forgets himself. He finds himself, as suggested, in custody of all the world. He says, stand free in custody of all the world. Destroy thy tunnel which thou hast, for ages long constructed. Stand free in custody of all the world. And the follower wants to know how to do that, and nobody tells him, but the other follower comes up, and he sees no indicated leader, himself a leader. There was no words indicated leader, no forms of truth, no forms of ceremonies. I've done an analysis of this, and maybe it would be worth listening to. Then, when he has served the follower in this selfless way, his tunnel disappeared. He noticed not its loss. Upon the playground of the world he stood with many fellow players, wide to the light, not just the players who had the same ideal that he did, but wide to the light of day, and in the far distance stood a mountain blue. Of course, blue is connected both with the sixth ray and the second, and from its summit issued forth a voice which said, "Come forward to the mountain top, and on its summit learn the invocation of a Savior." To this great task the follower, now a leader because of his spiritual status and selflessness, bent his energies, and he still pursues the way. So this tells us something about his level of evolution, not yet perhaps the initiate of the third degree, but if he's attempting to become a true savior, this could take him to the fourth degree and maybe into a change of ray. I think you can still become a savior on the sixth ray, and you can still take the fourth initiation on any of the rays of attribute, but also a change to the ray of the Savior, the second ray, is possible. Okay, so he, the follower, runs. Remember this? Run not so straight, because you may miss the truth all around you. He, the follower, runs blindly after his master. He doesn't want to see for himself. If the master sees, that's enough. He just wants to obey. He relinquishes the responsibility for true vision and allows the superior one to guide him and to offer the vision. He runs after his chosen ideal and loses himself in the chaos of his uncontrolled aspirations, and the glamour of his own thoughts about his goal, about his ideals and his goal. Curiously enough, there is a close relation. In other words, when he says curiously enough, he means, well, we might not think it is so, but there it is. There is a close relation between the third and the sixth rays. I've already pointed out the degree of abstraction in both, the degree of activity in both, and the degree of running in both. That word running is used. Running hither and thither, running hither and thither, abstraction, frenzy, and becoming lost, whether in the maze or in a place of distance from the goal. They share those things and maybe more. So between 3 and 6, yes, just there is between the first ray and the second rays and the second and the fourth. Well, we've talked about the middle position of the second and fourth. When we're looking for the similarity between the first and second, well, it's a mathematical. These are arithmetic relationships. And I suppose that the 1 and the 2 are both involved in the resolution of relationship into unity and oneness. It's hard, in a way, the first ray and the second ray are very much a pair of opposites. One easily detaching, the other detaching with difficulty, one easily centralizing, the other centralizing only with difficulty, one easily including and the other including only with difficulty, but eventually so. They both share a final inclusion or inclusiveness. They both share a final inclusiveness. The fourth, fifth, and sixth rays have no such paralleling relationships. Well, in other words, he starts with the 2 and then relates it to the 4. There are similarities, of course, along the line 3-5, 1-7, and 2-6, but they are of a different kind than he is here suggesting. Yet it has been suggested in Esoteric Psychology 1. Yeah, I'll just go to that here. Esoteric Psychology 1, right on page, let's say, 212. Yeah, between the third and fifth ray, there's a close relationship. The correspondence between the second and sixth rays shews itself in the intuitive grasp of synthesized knowledge and in the common bond of faithfulness and masterfulness. Steadfastness and perseverance are the corresponding characteristics of the first and seventh ray. Well, 3 and 5, 2 and 6, and 1 and 7, but maybe not quite the arithmetic relationship that we have between 1 and 2, 2 and 4, and 3 and 6. Although I don't know if Master DK has for us distinguished the difference. All right, now, between these pairs of rays is a line of special energy flowing, which warrants the attention of disciples who are becoming conscious of their relationships. A line of special energy, and perhaps that is what has to be defined. For myself, I just know there are relations here, and I look for certain similarities. The middleness of 2 and 4, the activity aspect of 3 and 6. I want to actually running hither and thither, and in general activity. And the ontological resolutions that are involved in 1 and 2. The whole drama of the resolution of duality. Those two arrays are involved in that. This relation and interplay only becomes active at a relatively high stage of evolution, and we might say, however, the relation between 1 and 7, 2 and 6, and 3 and 5 might become active earlier, perhaps. There is the resolution of the fourth ray types onto the second ray. They can also resolve onto the third. There is the resolution of the sixth ray types onto the third ray, which perhaps is not given so much attention in our teaching, but they could also resolve onto the second ray. It's interesting, the dual resolutions that are possible either for the sixth ray or the fourth ray, and you'd wonder why can't that be for the seventh ray and the fifth ray as well. But both 7 and 5 are said to resolve onto 1, except for some exceptions, and there are exceptions. The problem, therefore, of the sixth ray aspirant is to divorce himself from the thraldom of form, though not from form. Well, it's a bit like detachment, isn't it, in the fifth ray? One is detached from form, but one utilizes the form. With the fifth ray type, one detaches oneself from form, and yet one uses the form. Then use the forms, which then will neither veil nor hide the self, but will permit the nature of that self to penetrate the veils of life, as we have just been studying recently, and to stand quietly at the center, just as the third ray disciple has to do. So this is the similarity. Here DK tells us of a similarity in the method. Learn to stand quietly at the center. And that center, of course, is the center of one's life and consciousness. When one begins to achieve the restraint against rushing to the periphery. Both ray types are at first likely to be active upon the periphery of life, of experience. So here we have the word divorce, and we had the word earlier, dissociation. Okay. Note these two words, divorce and dissociation. It involves a separation. Of course, the sixth ray type is likely to be impractical, and so an hiatus may already exist between himself and the true use of the form. There is a separating from slavery. This is what DK is telling us. A separation from slavery to the form. The fifth ray type, that's the first ray. Fifth ray type separates from preoccupation with the form, focusing all his thought on the form. And we might say sixth ray type must not focus all his aspiration on particular forms, which he cathects, is that the technical word, or invests with undue importance, and hence which magnetize him. So, divorce from the thraldom of the form, but still remain practical enough to use the form, just as the fifth ray type must. If we have complete dissociation from form, then if there is complete dissociation from form, we have the idealist who is so, how can you put it, so heavenly high that he is no earthly good. There's just impracticality to the point of not lifting a finger in practical matters that are presented before us. Okay. Now, let's see what else here. There he learns, at the center, there he learns, at his own center, whether, it may not yet in the causal body, but at least his center as a soul in incarnation. There he learns breadth of vision and a right sense of proportion, and this is so important for the ray of undue emphasis, which is what it is. And of course, what glamour is really undue emphasis. Exaggeration and minimization. So he is always guilty of dismissing things as minimal and exaggerating his preferred things as maximal. And there at his center he learns a type of proportion. So we might say, restrain yourself from rushing outward and away from your true center, which will give a better and truer, less glamorous perspective. So these two qualities he always lacks: the breadth of vision and a right sense of proportion. You have to see a number of things and realize their relative value to have a right sense of proportion. But if you only see one or two things, you just can't. These two qualities he always lacks until the time comes when he can take his stand there and align himself with all visions, all forms of truth, all dreams of reality, and find behind them all God and his fellow men. So this is really a movement towards the second ray. I'm remembering Mary Bailey. She used to talk of the over-inclusiveness of the six-ray type. And at first I kind of wondered at that, because we know the six-ray type for being exclusive and not inclusive. But I suppose that once the six-ray type realizes it's been too exclusive, it goes too far in the other way, swinging to the opposite side, emphasizing the other of the pairs of opposites in that dichotomy of inclusion and exclusion. You see, in a way, this is not a vertical pair of opposites. It can be good to be exclusive, excluding ignorance, and including wisdom. It can be good to be inclusive rather than exclusive. Every type of inclusiveness suggests a type of exclusiveness and vice versa. And there is I guess it's a question really of the pairs of opposites which are neither one better than the other. Left is not better than right. And depending on how we interpret it, high is not necessarily better than low, although usually we interpret that along the vertical axis, and so we do have a higher valuation of high. But then, of course, to descend right into matter and serve there, to descend into the low worlds as opposed to keeping one's self too high and committing the same type of, quote, sin that some of the solar angels committed when they didn't want to get involved, and there were repercussions to that. Anyway, inclusive, exclusive is not the same kind of dichotomy as soul and personality, or as spirit and matter and so forth. Even spirit and matter have a certain kind of equivalence. But generally in our type of studies, the soul is more positively regarded than the personality because it is consisting of higher forms of life. In other words, the consciousness of the monad, when in soul consciousness, is immersed in higher forms of solar lives than the consciousness of the monad when it is further attenuated and immersed within the circumstances created by the lunar lords, which are a lower form of life. So no proper breadth of vision lacking, and no right sense of proportion, but this can be gained with growing centralization. So, you know, the centralization idea is also stand at the center, look around on every side, you see, we're told here. The centralization idea, which is of the second ray, is also of relative importance. Then and only then can he be trusted to work with the plan. As he stands upon the plane of earth, wide to the light of day with many fellow players, and seeing things as they see them. Everybody sees the mountain, let's put it like that, but from a different perspective. Everyone sees the mountain, but from a different perspective. And and the sixth ray type must learn to move along the circle and change his perspective of the central mountain. Then he will see that there are many ways to the same goal, and that the goal really is the same goal, even though masquerading as a different goal. All right, I typed too fast here and suffer the consequences. Haste makes waste. All right, then and only then can he be trusted to work with the plan, and shall we say, seeing the plan as it is, and as it is, and not as he desires it to be, according to personal preference. So, you know, what is the truth of our vision? How much do we see the world as it really is? How much do we see the world as we prefer it to be according to the bias of our desire body? The alignment evoked by this peaceful standing still, and I suppose also, also by divorce, dissociation, and restraint. Interesting about the peaceful standing still, he is using the same words as for the third ray type. I at the center am. Enforced quiet. Be still, learn to stand silent, quiet, and unafraid. I at the center am. And that's where you should be too. Stand at the center with me. Look up along the line, and from that center look up along the line and not along the many lines which in the space of eons you have woven. Be still and don't rush from point to point on the periphery, but stand at the center. So, you know, in this sixth ray type of reconditioning, many similarities are existing here. Don't be deluded by the outer forms, it says to the third ray type, and dissociate yourself, divorce yourself from all of the lesser visions which you have followed, it's saying to the other ray, to the sixth ray type. All right. So this peaceful standing still, this is, we can't say that the word is actually stillness, but it's dissociation followed by stillness and restraint. It produces a crisis. So this is the act that produces the crisis. Well, let's see. We can really say is a peaceful standing still, but also this produces an alignment, and the alignment brings the soul energy. Soul energy, I think that's a good one. SLE, soul energy. Yeah, brings the soul energy and the energy of the personality together, causing a clash or crisis. Right. So how shall we put it? Through dissociation from the vision and standing at the center and alignment at one center, not yet within the causal body, and alignment between soul and personality is achieved, and this alignment brings crisis. So when the frenzy stops, both for the third ray type and the sixth ray type, there is an alignment and a vision of conditions which bring about a crisis. All right. So peacefully standing still at the center, at one's own center, as the soul in incarnation, naturally, he says, produces a crisis, and it is, as usual, a most difficult one for the aspirant to handle. This is the case with all the ray types. Let's say always the crisis is difficult to handle. Okay, always. The crisis is difficult. Difficult to handle. It is a crisis which seems to leave him destitute of incentive, pendant, I hang betwixt the two, desiring neither. Destitute of incentive, of motive, of sensation, of appreciation by others, and of life purpose. This is very much like the law of repulse. And let's see, the shutter, the opening dimmed its light, a shutter seemed to close. The vision he had seen no longer shone. The follower stumbled in the dark. Life ended, and the world of thought was lost. Pendant he seemed. He hung with naught below, before, behind, above. To him naught was. I think that's a pretty good description here of what DK is talking about in the integration formula. It leaves him destitute of incentive. What is there to move towards? Of motive, why should I move? Of sensation, what do I even register now that I do not register, now that I'm dissociated from my vision? And leaves him destitute of appreciation by others and of life purpose. So he seems to lose all these things which spurred him on. The encouragement of others, appreciation by others, a sense of high purpose, the sensation of that which attracted him, the motive towards the goal, the reason he was moving towards the goal, what he hoped to achieve. All of this is lost because the original attractive vision fades, loses its magnetism, its power to arouse him to action or pursuit. The idea of my truth, my master, my idea, my way, leaves him. This is called the crisis of the loss of faith. You sometimes hear about this in sixth ray groups. Some have said that Mother Teresa herself underwent such a crisis where she worked on serving, but in the condition of a loss of faith, and she brought that to her confessor. Ultimately one's confessor becomes one's own soul. The soul sits in the confessional booth, as it were, and one bears one's human heart to the soul, and is, I suppose, to a degree, absolved by the forgiving nature of the soul. They say confession is good for the soul, the unburdening of the heart, the unburdening of the human consciousness, and raising it up into a condition of greater understanding. So there is a real loss of that which drew him forward. Let's put it like this: the loss of that which drew him forward, and as yet nothing to take its place. And that is so often the difficult transitional moment when the past is gone and the future is not yet in sight. And then one is forced back upon oneself, and no outer solution will do. As a matter of fact, one finds within oneself the proper spiritual allurement, incentive. The proper spiritual magnet is within. The extroverted sixth-ray type really needs this. So often at first turned outward in the wrong way, then later maybe turned inward even in the wrong way, becoming rather morbid about the whole thing, and then it's also possible to be turned inward and upward in the right way. So nothing to draw him on. The disbelieving, beginning of disbelief in all that used to seem so worthwhile, worth the time to be spent in his pursuit. Being sixth ray and therefore linked with the world of astral psychic life, the sixth plane, he is peculiarly sensitive to his own reactions and to the ideas of others where he and his truths are concerned. This is all about the crisis, right? Here DK is describing the crisis through which the sixth ray type passes. This describes the crisis through which the sixth ray type passes. So nothing to draw him forward, no reason to go back to what has been discounted as worthy of pursuit, rejected by his own inner voices, feeling quite the fool, rejected by others. He feels a fool and considers that others are thinking him so. So he's sensitive to his own reactions, let's just say. His own reactions make him seem to himself the fool, one who has expended energy unwisely, ignorantly, needlessly, and without dignity and without worthiness, and the projection. He is used to projecting his own conditions, his own psychic states on others, used to projecting his own psychic states on others, and so whether they are thinking negatively of him or not, he imagines that they are. So, again, he is rejected, banished, excluded, vulnerable, unsafe. The very thing that all of his militancy tried to overcome. You know, he wanted to achieve everlasting security and everlasting happiness, the great goal of the sixth ray, you might say. Everlasting security and everlasting happiness elude him again. The anticipation of these were enough to keep him going, but now he knows not which way to turn. The crisis, therefore, is severe, for it has to produce a complete readjustment of the self to the self. There must be really a turning inward, is necessitated. A turning inward. But he has no incentive for this until the cry from deep within his heart emerges, or the word goes forth from the temple of his heart, which speaks with clarity and power. His fanaticism, his devotion, his furious driving of himself and others, that's one of the phrases to which I have always responded with, yes, I recognize this. Maybe more in other lives, but certainly in this life as well. I've recognized myself to be one who's been on the sixth ray quite recently, and you know, with lots of vestiges of that even now, you know, a kind of a transitional type. I recognize this with the Aries sun, you know, the Mars and the sixth ray antecedents, the furious driving of himself and others. You know, when we recognize certain phrases that Master DK gives to us, we may recognize our own type, and maybe we will recognize those words from Esoteric Psychology 1, which I will deal with. I will discuss them and try to show why they apply to the particular ray in question. That would be definitely a section worth commenting on. So all of these things, his narrow intensity, his devotion, his furious driving of himself and others, He whipped himself to effort new, right? Isn't that what it tells us in the law of repulse? Sometimes he reached the person whom he loved and found instead of vision, beauty, a person like himself, and thus he tried. He wearied of his search. He whipped himself to effort new, the furious driving of himself, and then when you start to do that, you can be sure you'll be driving others as well, just to alleviate the anxiety of being alone and doing this, and seeing others do that. It ends the dissonance of duality. You don't have to deal with the possibility that you may be on the wrong track. You don't have to entertain that thought. Everyone around you is doing it, so you must be correct. So his wasted efforts, much like the, wouldn't we say, much like the futility of the third ray, wasted motion. Motion is not action. Maybe some of us have been told that. I've always been told that. And his lack of understanding of the point of view of others, let's just say, hence the inadequacy, adequacy of his psychological approach to others, making a very poor psychologist, have all gone. So he's not running forward to the periphery, but he has to stand still until and reorient. He must stand still and reorient, just as the seventh ray type has to do, facing that room of ordered beauty and stillness, whereas in back of him is that, and he has to reorient from the room of chaos to the room of ordered beauty and stillness. All have gone, but as yet nothing has taken their place. This is the stage of the wretched aspirant. Torn in two directions, pendant I hang betwixt the two, desiring neither. The great formula tells us about this. He says, time and its myriad forms I know too well. Yes, space and its life I cannot know. So that's the life at the center. Time and its myriad forms I know too well. Pendant I hang betwixt the two, desiring neither. Or I stand between the heavens and the earth. I vision God. That's one way. I see the forms God took. That's the other way. Naught do they mean to me. I hate them both. For one I cannot reach, because he has not reoriented. And for the lesser of the two I have no longer any love. Or the lower of the two I have no longer any love. So how to bring people who are in psychological, psycho-spiritual transition into that reorientation they need to again be filled with the right kind of faith and hope and spiritual incentive and a truer vision and the aspiration to drive it. How to bring them out of this wretched intermediate state of loss without the true vision having appeared. He is swept by futility, again a third ray word, really. Third ray. And his world rocks under him. He's hanging between the pairs of opposites. And if his world rocks under him, what does it mean? He has no foundation, no security on which to stand. So then, what do? Let him stand at the center of his own consciousness as a soul in incarnation, fixing his eyes on the soul because he has reoriented himself, and ceasing activity for a brief period of time until the light breaks in. So light is the next phase. So we have this crisis of realized futility, and loss of faith. And we have an alignment caused by peaceful standing still, and no longer running after one's visions and beloved ideals. Of course, it also says that the peaceful standing still includes a crisis, induces a crisis, but we can see how both are related. The alignment is induced by the peaceful standing still, and the crisis both. The crisis of loss of faith, realized futility, no way forward or backward, and then ceasing activity and standing at the center until the light breaks in. So this is a very receptive stage. It's a stage of indetermination or non-determination. It's a stage of non-activity. It's related to the, in a way, related to the second ray. To the second ray. It is receptive and still. And what happens when the light breaks forth? Well, okay, and now DK gives us a very high example of this, much higher than one who is, seeking to integrate his personality. There's here an approach to Shambhala. It is interesting here to note that the Master Jesus, as he hung upon the cross, experienced on a much higher turn of the spiral than is possible to the disciple the acme and the height of this crisis. So we learn that these types of crises have higher analogies, and that the formula could well have higher applications than the one which simply aims at integration of the personality with the soul. The acme and the height of the crisis, though in his case being attuned to God and to all God's children, there swept over him the sum total of the dilemma of the world disciples and all the agony of the astral awareness of this dilemma, voicing itself in the agonizing words, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" The vision of all the good temporarily was negated, and the dissonance was seen. And maybe, maybe the encouraging support of the angel of the presence also left. Because I think, at the fourth degree one is left very much on one's own with the quality of consciousness one has achieved, and the infusion of the solar angel is withdrawn, and one is left in this agonizing position to see what one will do. So so the Master Jesus didn't feel a fool himself or feel rejected. He felt for all the others who were in agony. And DK talks about this. This is the true dark night of the soul, and not the kind of lesser dark nights when around the time of the second degree people fall into some kind of despair or depression concerning the gaining of their spiritual objectives. Here, Master Jesus is identified, or the Initiate Jesus is identified, with all of humanity and their agony, the dilemma of the world disciples, because he was a world disciple. He was a world disciple of the third degree, and becoming an arhat of the fourth degree. And the agony of the astral awareness of this dilemma. So if we somehow think that we are done with all the reactions of the astral body at the 2nd degree. Well, here is someone taking the 4th degree and showing the agony of his astral awareness of this dilemma. To really gather any true notion of this state will require a deep pondering and meditation, projecting forward of our consciousness to a time when we will be indeed identified or tuned to God as the becoming 4th degree initiate is, and to all of God's children. There has to be eventually a profound revelation of the triumphant good which will sweep over this type of initiate. But he is on the cross of his own making, in a way, very much as a human being who is no longer, in a sense, supported by the angel. He has to find his own interior monadic support. So I'll say that here. This type of initiate has to find his own interior monadic support, now that the support of the angel of the presence has left him. It is the support of the presence itself. And one must look deeply enough within to find the eternal victory of the presence, regardless of circumstances. Of course, it can also, when one has this kind of vision, inspire one along a bodhisattvic line to do all that one possibly can do to alleviate, to end the dissonance of the situation. End the dissonance. This is a great task, and the 6th ray soul will be inspired to tread the path of the world's saviors, and not necessarily when transferring to the 3rd ray. I guess every type of crucifixion is different, and we don't give so much attention to the crucifixion that may be found along 3rd ray lines or 5th ray lines, even 7th ray lines. What is it? Along the line of 6, 4, 2, and 1, we may have some sense of how the crucifixion may go, but when one is active in the realm of knowledge and within the divine mind, or when one is involved in the magical process, how is the crucifixion experienced? Because indeed it can be experienced on any ray, as the beginning of Letters on Occult Meditation, somewhere around page 15 to 18, right in there, tells us that this is possible. So we pass through a difficult situation. It's an agonizing situation. We have no basis, but at the center, let us say that the support of the soul will appear to the integrating personality, integrating personality oriented towards the soul. Just as the support of the monad must appear for the high initiate who is being divested of his solar angel. Always then, a looking within for stability is the main method for achieving release from this particular agony. But by facing futility and himself, and by surrendering himself to the life at the center, and we see how much the act of surrender is involved in the process of the 6th ray type, and of the second. And there, holding himself poised and still, yet alert, the light will break in and reveal to the disciple that which he needs to know. It sounds more like a revelation, you know. Sounds like during the stage of crisis there were revelations of his condition by the incoming light. So the kind of light we're talking about here, see, remember when we talked about the revelations of the light for the second-ray type, of defects, first of all. So always there's going to be the light which reveals the dissonant condition, the undesirable condition. Always the light will do that. But DK is now emphasizing a higher type of light here, I think. DK is emphasizing a higher type of light which reveals more about what needs to be done. For the second-ray type 2, there is the light which reveals the next step ahead and the traveling companions. But let us keep in mind, that the first access to the light during the stage of crisis will reveal defects and an undesirable condition into which the aspirant has, or which the aspirant has generated for himself. And I'm sure we all have taken that good, long, hard look at ourselves as more light has come to us, and we've seen all the way from the light that shocks to the light that disturbs, you know, to the light which for a while depresses. I guess we've all had that kind of revelation when one sees oneself in a new light. Well, I'll show you another stanza that takes us through the same thing. So, what dost thou see, O disciple, on the path, in this esoteric catechism, right? Naught but myself, O master of my life. Look closer at thyself and speak again. What seest thou? A point of light which waxes and which wanes and which makes the darkness darker. So one sees one's aspirational, inconsistent, inconstant aspirational self. Look with intense desire towards the dark, and when the light shines forth, grasp opportunity what appears. A horrid sight, O master of my life. I like it not. It is not true. I am not this or that, this evil, selfish thing. It is not me. I am not this. Well, that's the light of revelation right there. When you look with intense desire towards the dark, even the darkness of your own nature, the darkness has been made darker by the waxing of the point of light which you are, and look into the dark. What do you see? It's horrible. It's the dweller. It's the unredeemed self. It's the unfinished business of the past. Then there's one more step, thank goodness. And we can say, turn on the light with will and power and fierce desire, and then recount the vision that may come. What seest thou? Beyond the dark, revealed to me by means of light, I see a radiant form which beckons me. That form, you know, would be the soul self, or the solar angel, or the angel invested in the egoic nature. What is this being standing gracious in the dark and in the light? Looking both ways, really. Is it and can it be myself? And so, rather than this vision of the horrible conditions that one has managed to generate by creating in the darkness rather than in the light, we begin to see the vision of the angelic self, oneself as the angel of the presence, oneself supported and pervaded by the solar angel. It is a beckoning form, giving us a sense of our own higher reality, which will lead into the presence itself. So this is from Rays and Initiations and a catechism, it's called. I think there's also one just like this, similar to this, in, perhaps it's in Initiation, Human and Solar, or perhaps I'm just imagining that. So anyway, this light, we have to think about the light, because the light has a number of stages, and the first stage is always the revelation of the undesirability of the present condition, but then how to get out of this present condition. There must be at least some light in this crisis, you know. It's not necessarily the light of extrication. It is the light which reveals the inadequacy. And then comes the light of extrication, I'll use that sort of third-rate word, is always included in this process of the shining of the light following crisis. But light is also available during the stage of crisis, and it is what one sees in that light which makes the crisis worse and deeper. So the light will break in and reveal to the disciple that which he needs to know. He learns to express that inclusive love which is his major requirement, the expansion and deepening of the love energy. And, you know, the revelation from the mountain blue helps with this, where he's learning the invocation of the Savior, and to let go the narrow, one-pointed attitude which he has hitherto regarded as love. So we might say devotion is a phase of love, but a preliminary phase. Of course, we as monads are lords of ceaseless persevering devotion. It is devotion and the sixth ray in many respects that drove us into these lower worlds for redemptive purposes. So we cannot slight the devotion of the monad, or even the devotion of the solar angel, the devotion of the soul, to raising the lives in the lower worlds. But there is a narrowness. We might say there are many things worth loving. In fact, all things in essence are worth loving. So he welcomes then all visions, if they serve to lift and comfort his brothers. This is now so tolerant. And think of the intolerance that's going on in the world today. I was thinking about the Crusades, how extraordinarily intolerant they were of all other religions than Christianity, killing the Muslims, killing the Jews, you know, on the Crusades. And now the reverse is going on. Many Christians are being killed simply for being Christian. This is not the second ray stage. The Baha'i faith within the Muslim religion is the broad second ray approach, welcoming, what does it say, all visions, all loves, all devotions, if they serve to lift and comfort his brothers. He welcomes all truths if they are agents of revelation to other minds. In other words, at this point, he is no longer fixated on the form. So, we might say there is a revelation of truth beyond form, and of many forms which are useful in arriving at the truth. And, the higher sixth-ray types will have this. How to determine whether a person is in transition from the sixth ray to the second ray or has blossomed into some sort of sixth ray high tolerance. We know the Master Jesus is still on the sixth ray, maybe even in his monadic nature, at least an aspect of his monadic nature, but he has all this. He's not per se on the second ray. He's the head of the great sixth ray church under the influence of the second ray Christ, and he has developed this tolerance for all. So it might be called, all this be called a movement from the one to the many, and it is desirable. The reverse of the third ray motion. The third ray has to look up along the line and not along the many lines which in the space of eons have held him prisoner. But the advanced sixth ray type, having been so narrow, has to diversify, and some of the appreciation of multiplicity, which the third ray type has, comes to the sixth ray type. So both the second ray and third ray tendencies antidote the usual sixth ray approach. And he welcomes all dreams if they can act as incentives to his fellow men, because he sees God. Finally, he sees God as God is, and more so, and finds that God is what is of importance, and not the specifics of the ways to God. So what is said here, let's see if we can go there. There it is. Okay. He says, die not for outer forms, forget not God who dwells behind the vision. There are many visions, and it's only one God. So it's not the distinction of vision and the symbols related to that vision which are of importance, but God who stands behind, the planetary logos, the being, who stands behind all these many ways to the being. And so let's just say, we might say, call this escape from the slavery of symbolism. Taking the symbol for that for which it stands. So many of us are dying for symbols and for outer forms representing inner reality, which will be the same for all. And it's just a deeper penetration, a deeper search is what is required. A deeper search, just as for the second ray type, is needed. And he shares in them all, so the power of identification is there, yet retains his poised position at the center. So there is, at last, a calmness, a stillness, and yet a identificatory participation in diversity of approach. Well, how many people do we know of this nature? How many people going off the sixth ray do we say, well, if that works for you, we'll all get there. All roads lead to Rome in one respect. There are many ways to achieve identification with divinity. I know, for some of us who are treading the path of intellectual esotericism, that requires the acute mind, we are likely at first to say, oh, well, look at those other methods. They don't lead there. But if one really examines carefully what those methods have in them, which is of value, one becomes very tolerant and says, well, look, according to the ray type, treading those methods, they will serve to reach the same goal, whereas, let's say, the path that I'm on, that we are on, might not serve them at all. So the essence becomes of more importance. The end becomes more important than the means to the end. The end becomes more important than valuing exclusive means to that end. This is not to say that the end justifies the means. We're not talking about negativity, because if you pursue using certain means an end which is not resonant with the means, you'll never get to that end anyway. The means and the end have to have in them something of the same quality. In other words, by killing everybody all around you, you're not going to get to a lasting peace. You'll get to a cemetery, all right, but that's not the peace that we are seeking to achieve. So something in the means has to be resonant with the ends, otherwise the means will not really lead to the ends. We'll just be fooling ourselves when we say that the ends will be achieved through means which are really inconsistent with it. Okay, thus we can see that the essential integration of this unit into its group can now take place. So the revelation has occurred, but DK has not really discussed it by naming it as such. But it seems to be the revelation of the deeper reality and of the many ways there are to achieve knowledge of and identification with this deeper reality. The revelation of the many ways to the one being, the revelation of the many ways to the one reality, which in this case is the unitive reality of the soul. So thus we can see that the essential integration of this unit into his group can now take place. Notice how he says into his group, where sometimes we say, well, the integration of the individual with the soul, but the integration of the individual into his group is also the same as the integration with the soul, because the soul is group conscious. Group conscious, yes. Well, okay, little more to say here. The problem of the disciple upon this ray is greatly increased by the fact that the sixth ray has been the dominant ray for so many centuries and is only now passing out. Beginning, when was it? I think beginning in 1625. Is that correct? Let us see here, if we go to Esoteric Psychology 1 for our little cycles chart. 1625. It began to pass out in 1625, and we might try to look at the history of that period to see whether we can see a lessening of that influence. Certainly there was a recrudescence of it around the time of the Counter-Reformation in 1600 or so. The Reformation was a broadening, along the second ray, third ray, even fourth ray line. The Counter-Reformation, the reassertion of the authority of the Catholic Church towards the years 1600, maybe marked, as it is said, by the execution, the burning of Giordano Bruno, who was a great and expansive thinker. And but following, and there were many sixth ray emphases following that time. But I think that the most intense moment of resistance may well have passed. The Inquisition did continue, and with the Inquisition one had the reassertion of the sixth ray, but although it continued even into the early 1800s, I know that from an opera by the name of Tosca, So, and there was the Inquisition in Rome, into which Cagliostro was thrown, as if thrown to the lions, and apparently he ended his days in an inquisitional dungeon. That was toward the end of the 18th century, so into the beginning of the 1800s. That Inquisition had continued, but its worst manifestations were occurring, I think, up to the year 1600, and perhaps began to lessen after that, though we had quite a bit of terrible persecution in Germany and in other places where the witches were hunted, and maybe that was taking place in the 1600s. Fear, superstition, all involved in that kind of witch hunt. But really a rejection of the seventh ray, actually, is what it was all about. The seventh ray coming in 1675. We could look at the exact dates, but I think Stephen Pugh has done some very good work on this, looking at the incoming and outgoing of the ray cycles and the events in history which corresponded with this type of incoming and outgoing. All right, so a little bit more. The problem of the disciple upon this ray is greatly influenced, but you kind of wonder, will this be the problem? Think of the problem of the disciple upon the seventh ray at the end of the Aquarian age, because the seventh ray will be passing out. So maybe when there is the same ray having been so operative for so many years, and it begins to pass out, and we're dealing with some of the negative repercussions of the ray, there will be a problem of transcending the negative parts of the ray. Maybe we can expect in those days some very materialistic magic from which mental materialistic magic from which humanity will have to be dissuaded as the seventh ray passes out, just the way we're seeing a lot of the fanatical negatives of the sixth ray at this time. So therefore, the idealistic fanatical thought forms built up by the devotee upon this ray are powerful and persistent and influential. Upon those who still focus upon the sixth ray in their soul nature. The world today is fanatically idealistic. This is pervasive, regardless of what our ray may be, and this is one of the causes of the present world situation. We have the fanatical pursuit of the higher ideals as announced in the Four Freedoms. We also have the fanatical pursuit of speciality, fanatical pursuit of eminence, of race, or of material national form. This was in the time when the races, the idea of the master race was prominent in the persecution of those who were not. Now we still have it, the fanatical pursuit of the eminence of religion. Of religion. My religion's better than your religion. How do we know? Well, it's the latest one, isn't it? Well, is it? Hanging on to these rather crude concrete-minded fixations for the sake of the security of the psyche. So one can feel safe and one can feel important. You know, egoism is for both. We might say that egoism helps the egoist feel both safe and important, the glamour of special selection. So is this being reduced now to some extent? This was in the 1930s that this book was written, and Mars has since faded in some of its most destructive aspects from the world scene. We've been told somewhere, you know, following the war. But we do see a recrudescence of this in the religious situation, and people are really, you know, blind warriors in the incompletely understood cause. It's very serious, very dangerous, and with God on your side, how can you lose, and how can you help but be cruel, because God sanctions your cruelty. God desires this, God desires that, some anthropomorphic projection upon God, not the philosophical deity at all, not the great encompassing intelligences, but almost like tribal, religio-tribal gods are at work at this time. We might even say that religio-tribal gods are today asserting themselves through the projection of the ignorant psyche upon the idea of deity. It is hard for the man who is the one-pointed devotee to free himself from the prevailing influence of the sixth ray. Hard to see beyond the obvious, hard to see beyond that which grants you inclusion, belonging, security. For the energy thus generated feeds that which he seeks to leave behind. So we are, the sixth ray type is fighting with the the momentum of the sixth ray and the forms of thought which have been generated and are persistent. If he can, however, grasp the fact that devotion, expressing itself through a personality, engenders fanaticism, and fanaticism is separative, frequently cruel, and often motivated by good ideals, but that it usually overlooks, there's one of those words, the immediate reality by rushing off after the self-engendered vision of truth, he will go far along the way of solving his problem. He must recognize these things. So these are required recognitions, and in a few words, DK has summed up what I was trying to say earlier. So here, the solution is offered. And this word overlooking, or obliviousness, as I say, if you're running off towards the ideal, and it's really a self-engendered vision, it's not a vision of reality at all, it's something you cooked up, really, something the individual has, I'll use the slang, cooked up for self-engendered, overlooking the immediate reality, so thus no common sense, such as the fifth ray type has, lack of common sense, and thus of adjustment, of action to the world situation. Rushing off. Run not so straight. Do not rush. Rush not from point to point. Notice the word rush found in both the third and the sixth ray. The word rush and its derivatives is found in relation to both the third ray and the sixth ray. So, how do we solve the problem? If he can, however, grasp the fact that devotion, expressing through the personality, through the involutionary lunar vehicles, involutionary lunar vehicles engenders fanaticism and simply a narrow point of view fueled by a great concentration of energy, and that fanaticism is separative and cruel and thus divisive in a Martian way, right? In a Martian way, often motivated by good ideals, but failing to be practical, failing to overlook the immediate things that could actually lead to the achievement of the ideal. But it usually overlooks the immediate reality. It does not serve the immediately present, as does Virgo when working under the second ray. And by rushing off after a self-engendered vision of truth, he will go far along the lines, along the way to the solving of his problem. But how do you make anybody teachable? I've just been wondering. I looked at myself after 70 years of life in this incarnation. I said, well, finally, maybe I'm getting a little bit teachable, maybe a little bit, not too much, but maybe my mind is at times sufficiently empty of my own preconceptions to be a little bit teachable. Well, when you've got that ideal in front of your eyes, it's self-engendered and you're holding to it for dear life, how can you let anything else in? So this depends upon some unhappy experiences, some hard knocks, some disappointments and disillusionments. I can say that here, that disappointments and disillusionments will help make this ray type and teachable. If he can then realize that devotion expressing itself through the soul is love and inclusiveness plus understanding, so in a way a very high meaning for soul devotion. For soul devotion, almost as if it is on the second ray. So if he can realize that devotion expressing itself through the soul is love and inclusiveness plus understanding, how are those words any different from that which characterizes the second ray? It's as if the sixth ray is the second ray, and in a certain respect, it is. It's a more concrete form of love, and second ray is a more abstract form. So when widening out this concretion into abstraction, we begin to become lovingly inclusive and lovingly understanding. Then he will learn eventually to free himself from the idealism of others, not reacting to their ideals with a negative, rejecting response, and not reacting to his own ideals with something which does, with a way that only confirms them and emphasizes them, but not standing back to see them as they truly are, not an unbiased vision. So when he has learned eventually, apparently it's not immediately the case, to free himself from the idealism of others and of himself, and will identify himself with that of the hierarchy, the idealism of the hierarchy, I suppose, the idealism of the spiritual hierarchy, which is the loving working out of God's plan. Then he will learn eventually to free himself from the idealism of others and of himself, and will identify himself with that of the hierarchy, which is the loving working out of God's plan. So the third aspect of divinity is involved. The third aspect of divinity is involved, as it too is part of the third ray, and it's like goodwill is love in action. It's a blending of the second and third aspects of divinity, really, isn't it? So then a new form of soul idealism. The soul is idealistic in its own way. A new form of soul idealism will become his motivating force. It is free from hatred, from intense emphasis upon an aspect or a part, so hence it has a sense of proportion, and is not limited by the sense of time. And I would say that both the sixth ray type and the third ray type are limited strongly by the sense of time. Saving yourself in time, completing what you want to do in time. The idea of evanescence is so clear. Vanishing is so clear to both types. So accomplish before your time is out and up. This is what is said of the sixth ray and its integration formula. It begins in a state of frenzy and pursuit and ahamkaric emphasis, and the result of all of this is disappointment and the disappearance of the vision which provided incentive. After having followed many changing visions, none seem to work, and depression ensues, and a state of suspension hanging pendant between the future and the past. What shall be done? There is no knowledge of what should be done, except that the voice of the soul speaks and starts to give the good advice. And this advice is don't rush outward towards the form or the material vision, but instead turn around, repent, as it were. Well, you'll have loads of six-ray types emphasizing the idea of repentance, of turning around the other way. Face the soul and do not hold in your mind's eye a limited vision of something that is far truer. How does all this happen? You know, there is this stopping in the center and remaining still. Let's just say after much disappointment, after much non-fulfillment, then stopping in the center, remaining still, alignment is produced, and the soul can draw nearer and clashes with the personality, emphasizing the uselessness, the futility, the uselessness of the previous way of pursuing. And so the previous incentives disappear, and there is the need to see a new and perhaps more soul-centered or abstracted vision, a not so form-oriented vision. This will come into the life as one stands still. The light will break in. The light breaking in reveals the soul and its world and other highly desirable objectives within oneself. So one turns towards the soul, and the light gets stronger. And eventually, strong enough to reveal what the soul is, what God is, and the possibility of the many ways to God. The revelation of the nature of the soul and of the many ways to God. And this, then the individual draws closer and closer and identifies with this broad, inclusive, tolerant view which emphasizes the values of the ideals of all. And then, indeed, there is integration with the ideals, with the worthy ideals of all being emphasized. There is an integration with the ideals of the soul, which are inclusive, loving, devoted, tolerant. All these things come about in this stage of integration. And what is the word, you know? Divorce, dissociation, restraint. A kind of cutting of your connection with all that motivated you before, even though it has temporarily some personally, possibly depressive results. Because there's no use chasing after the will-o'-the-wisp. The forms which one has self-engendered as worthy of pursuit just do not satisfy the soul within oneself, the spirit within oneself. Always, I would say it as a general statement, as a general statement, dissatisfaction precedes reorientation, repentance. So we just have to come to the point in all of these formulas where it just doesn't work for us anymore. And something within us is causing a great friction. Something within causes a great friction which becomes unbearable and disturbing. And one seeks relief and release in the real, or in the more real, the soul within. So if you're on the sixth ray in your soul, or you're making a transition, these are such practical formulas. These are ways of finding a true centering in the reality of your inner self, and in this case, a dissociation, a divorce from, a restraint from false pursuit, dissociation with all that had led you astray in your well-meaning pursuit. So, dissociation from all that had led you astray in your well-meaning pursuit of what you thought was real, satisfying, lastingly good, forever the provider of eternal happiness. But I always like very much when it is said, and from that gateway to eternal life and cosmic peace let the word sound. I am the seeker and the sought. I rest. I'll have to do those short stanzas. I am the seeker and the sought is the realization that the sixth ray type in hot pursuit of something other than himself discovers. I am the seeker and the sought. I've been seeking for myself all the time. I've been seeking for the true self. Then I get into self-realization and I find the true self, and my whole perception of reality becomes much broader. You can see how we will be able to help people passing through these spiritual crises according to the age-old methods provided by the old commentary found in the archives of the hierarchy and of Shambhala as exemplifications of the ageless wisdom. We don't have to cook it up in our own human mind. I suppose we could, but we can use what is proven over many, many cycles, probably upon many, many planets, maybe in many, many systems. We can use that which always works if rightly applied. So this is the story for the sixth-ray type. I see a vision that satisfies desire. It feeds and stimulates its growth. I lay my life upon the altar of desire, the scene, the sense, that which appeals to me, the satisfaction of my need, a need for that which is material, for that which feeds emotion, that satisfies the mind, that answers my demand for truth, for service, and my vision of the goal. It is the vision which I see, the dream I dream, the truth I hold, the active form which meets my need, that which I grasp and understand. My truth, my peace, my satisfied desire, my dream, my vision of reality, my limited ideal, my finite thought of God. For these I struggle, fight, and die. Love of the truth must always be. Desire and aspiration, reaching out for that which is material or soaring upward towards the vision of reality, must ever find their satisfaction. For this men work, driving themselves and irking others. They love the truth as they interpret it. They love the vision and the dream, forgetting that the truth is limited by mind, narrow and set, one-pointed, not inclusive, forgetting that the vision touches but the outer fringe of mystery and veils and hides reality. The word goes out from soul to form. Run not so straight. The path that you are on leads to the outer circle of the life of God. The line goes forward to the outer rim. Stand at the center, look on every side. Die not for outer forms. Forget not God, who dwells behind the vision. Love more your fellow men. And perhaps, you know, when we have studied carefully what D.K. has said about this stanza, and we read it and reread it, it will have more and more to say to us. I would strongly suggest that anybody who knows that your soul is on a particular ray, you memorize the technique of integration suited for your ray. And it will remind you of the necessary steps at odd moments when you are undergoing exactly those decisions and tests which relate to the integration process.